The Iranian capital, Tehran, a city scarred by rioting in angry protests against the Shah. And this is what happened in the streets below when they were taken over by huge crowds of demonstrators. They made it quite clear that their main target was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Shah and Shah, King of Kings. A portrait of the Shah's father, Reza Shah, was also seized on by the crowd. Years of political repression and the long-standing conflict between the Shah and the powerful Muslim religious leaders erupted in a wave of violence early this year. A newspaper article attacking the exiled Muslim cleric Ayatollah Khomeini caused a riot in Khomeini's home city of Qom, one of two holy cities in Iran. Police opened fire, killing about 70 people. Then followed riots and shooting in Yazd, Tabriz and Abadan, where nearly 400 people were burnt to death in a horrible cinema fire. Finally, similar violence reached the capital itself. At first, troops and police were slow to intervene, unlike on September the 8th, now known as Black Friday. Then troops actually opened fire on demonstrators in Jaleh Square in East Tehran only hours after the announcement of martial law. The death toll that day ran into hundreds, some of them women. One theory is that this time the authorities consciously allowed the situation to get out of hand in order to discredit the opposition. Shops, banks, offices and foreign embassies were looted and burned. This motive would fit the government claim made at the time that the demonstrators were a communist-inspired unruly mob. Eventually the troops did move in, not shooting, but using rifle butts against anyone who got in their way. The day of this riot, a new military government was announced, with General Gholam Reza Azari appointed as Prime Minister. In a national broadcast, the Shah said he had tried his best to form a coalition government, but his efforts had failed. The only alternative was a military government, which he described as temporary. The handing over of the government to the military brought to an end the brief tenure of Prime Minister Jafar Sharif Emami, who'd been presented to the Shah with the rest of the cabinet at Said Abad Palace just 6 weeks before. Part of his brief was that priority should be given to respecting Islamic religious traditions, and in addition to political concessions, he ordered the closure of the big gambling casinos, abolished the post of Minister of State for Women's Affairs, and reintroduced the old Islamic calendar that the Shah had replaced with the Persian imperial calendar. These had all been demanded by the mullahs, the religious leaders who claimed that liberalizing policies, including women's rights, were undermining the sanctity of the Islamic household. At last, the Shah was acknowledging the power of his religious opponents. In another conciliatory move to mark his 59th birthday in October, the Shah ordered prison gates to be opened for the release of over 1,100 political prisoners and also several religious leaders jailed for leading or inciting riots. The idea seemed a sound one, but many of the young people released went straight off to join protest demonstrations, and others gave interviews describing mistreatment and tortures at the hand of SAVAK, the secret police. Good publicity for the Shah had turned to bad. More riot police, this time in Rome. Here, as in other European capitals, young Iranian students and political exiles have been attacking Iranian embassies and offices for years, and with a degree of violence that's only now been overtaken on the streets at home. All these events have effectively shattered the Shah's dream of pushing the backward country he inherited 37 years ago into the ranks of the world's leading industrialized nations. Though there's no doubt that Tehran does have the air of a bustling Western-style capital. Its population has doubled in 7 years. The prosperity was the result of the oil boom in the early 70s, which suddenly gave Iran masses of foreign exchange. The Shah helped to launch a gigantic program of investment, construction, and industrialization. But even the imposing new buildings didn't please everyone. Traditionally, the people like homes that give them seclusion and privacy. Living in blocks of flats makes them feel exposed to public view, something the traditionalists hate. The shops became filled with imported luxury goods and clothes, and a lot of people made a lot of money out of the boom in the economy. It's no secret that profiteering and corruption have been an unhappy byproduct of this newfound wealth, and private pockets must have benefited at the expense of the public. Following a familiar pattern, Tehran's population was swollen by hundreds of thousands of peasants who were drawn in from the countryside for more profitable work. Inevitably, a lot of cultivated farmland turned back into desert as a result, and local produce became a rarer and rarer sight on the streets. For ages, Iran had been self-sufficient in food. Suddenly, over half its food had to be imported. In at least one respect, though, the traditionalists have come to terms with modern technology, the tape cassette. In general, most aspects of modern civilization, as known in the West, are offensive to the Muslim fundamentalists. According to the ideologists, Islam is not only a religion, but a total system derived from the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. In the Quran are clear guidelines for every aspect of personal, social, and political life, and there is not even room for allegiance to a sovereign. The monarchy, it says, must be subordinate to the will of the people. The mullahs are saying, in effect, that the Shah's great plans for a modern Western-style Iran, built on the oil wealth, is not only a waste of time, but it's also morally wrong. Iran's huge oil fields and refineries in the south are of vital importance to the country's economic health. And with the November rioting, for the first time, the oil workers came out on a mass strike in sympathy. Just one day's strike meant a loss of $59 million in foreign earnings, and the action by the 37,000 oil men was only part of labor unrest that's disrupted almost every sector of industry and the economy. The oil workers were striking in support of specific political demands, including an end to martial law, the release of all political prisoners, and the immediate trial of officials accused of corruption. The stance of the strikers was closer to that of the political left than to the Muslim traditionalists. But both sides have united in their common aim to rid Iran of the Shah. Ironically, it was the use of oil as a political weapon by Arab states after the 1973 Middle East war that helped to quadruple the price of crude oil. Now oil's being used as a political weapon against the Shah. His response was perhaps predictable. He sent in the troops. But this time there was no shooting. The main aim was to prevent sabotage, and gradually the men began returning to work. Opposition leaders, however, now know they can threaten the Shah's economic lifeline at any time. The Shah has already had to cancel expensive long-term industrial and military projects because of oil price fluctuations in the outside world. Now, if his political opponents don't get what they want, they're prepared to bring Iran face to face with bankruptcy by action within the country's borders. It hasn't always been so. This is the ancient city of Persepolis, which only 7 years ago provided the setting for what was possibly the Shah's greatest hour. He then played host to over 50 heads of state from east and west at lavish celebrations marking the 2500th anniversary of the founding of the Persian Empire. The cost of the extravaganza was said to be $100 million. And at the time, the Shah was strong enough to silence, or at least ignore, the criticism at home. Now Persepolis is just a distant memory for the royal family, the glory that was yesterday. From the old to the new, and another of the Shah's dreams. These British-built tanks are part of a whole range of sophisticated weaponry that would give Iran the fourth largest armed forces in the world. Billions of dollars have already gone on building up the military machine, but spending's had to be cut here too. The armed forces total about 250,000. These are new recruits in training. Senior officers are generally considered the most loyal of the Shah's supporters, and that's why installing a military government is the Shah's last hope. Even so, in the present political climate, no one can be sure what would happen if there were a large-scale confrontation between the troops and the people. Would the average soldier open fire, or would he revolt? Meanwhile, the army has been given a 6-month mandate to enforce law and order, leading up to fresh general elections. In such a volatile situation, though, 6 months can seem a very long time. Tehran's a capital unaccustomed to the shouts and echoes of dissent. That's because 93% of the population of 34.5 million belong to the Shiite branch of Islam. They don't believe in violence and aggression, and that's why it's so surprising to see women, dressed in the traditional head-to-toe veil, joining in the demonstrations. Those who oppose the Shah on religious grounds are calling for the enforcement of Islamic laws and a move against what they see as the decadent excesses of modernism. Such things as pornography, prostitution and gambling. In fact, when the casinos were closed, it was to help pacify the religious conservatives. As frustrations have mounted, Iranians have turned to their Islamic religious leaders, the turbaned, black-robed mullahs, who themselves feel their influence has waned. For centuries, the daily lives of the Persians have been guided by the mullahs in every way, spiritually, culturally, and economically. So the Shiite leaders have felt seriously threatened by the Shah's efforts to create a 20th century Western-style nation. The Shah's widespread land reforms, for example, not only stripped the wealthy of their fortunes, but also divested the Shiite clergy of their vast holdings, and thus widened the gap between monarch and mullah. The most powerful mullah inside Iran today is Ayatollah Shariat Madari, a revered Islamic scholar who condemns the recent violence, but strongly opposes the Shah on constitutional and religious grounds. Although he looks anything but a revolutionary, he's the man who personifies the greatest challenge the Shah has faced in a generation. Shariat Madari opposes the Shah's regime for many reasons, including its alleged use of torture, censorship and bribery, but he still refuses to criticize the Shah openly. What he wants is freedom of expression and a government truly representative of the people. He also requests the appointment, as called for by the Constitution, of a 5-mullah watchdog committee in Parliament. Outside the country, opposition is headed by another mullah, who symbolizes political resistance. He's Ayatollah Khomeini, who's been in exile for the last 15 years. Khomeini enjoys a widespread and popular following, which includes people not only from religious elements, but also those throughout the world who are generally opposed to the present Iranian government. Khomeini maintains that Iran's problems will only be solved when the Shah steps down to give way to an Islamic republic. Khomeini headed the opposition against the Shah in 1963 and was then sent into exile. He went to live in Iraq, but 2 months ago he moved to Paris on a 3-month tourist visa. There's an endless stream of people coming to visit him, some from as far away as the United States. Twice a day, Khomeini ventures outside and sits facing Mecca while he conducts prayer meetings for all his followers. Khomeini has accused the Shah's government of killing thousands of Iranian people in the unrest and rioting. He's also expressed the hope that the armed forces will, as he puts it, come to their senses and join the anti-government struggle. In fact, he left Iraq because the government there had forbidden him to make any kind of public declaration about the Shah's regime. Since his arrival in France, Khomeini has kept in touch with his followers in Iran through phone calls and written messages. He's so influential that in desperation, the Shah sent a delegation from Tehran to offer Khomeini 2 alternatives, either a tough military government or some form of coalition in which the Shah would play a less important role, and members of the opposition would hold some of the major posts. The Ayatollah, though, said no, for he believes the Shah's time is running out anyway. The delegation was headed by Karim Sanjabi, whose National Front Party toughened its opposition on his return home, apparently to keep in step with the Ayatollah. Only a day later, Sanjabi was taken into custody by plainclothes officers.
Where are you being taken, sir? Did you expect to be taken into custody like this, sir?
I don't know exactly.
It happened just moments before he was about to address a press conference, during which he was expected to read a statement denouncing the monarchy as an illegal form of government.
A general from martial law office came downstairs and met with Dr. Karim Sanjabi, the leader of Iranian National Front, and he brought a paper with him saying about the statement that he made in Paris, which was approved by Ayatollah Khomeini, that three-principle statement. And after that, the martial law officer, who was a general, said that he's arresting him and Mr. Dariush Furuhat.
Did they say the nature of the charge?
They did not mention it. They just said that they are going to arrest him for this statement.
Did they say where they were taking him?
No, they said that they are going to take him to martial law office.
Do you fear for his safety under arrest?
I doubt that.
It's unlikely that any harm will come to Sanjabi, and his arrest may be simply part of the government's policy of trying to force opposition groups to compromise. The Shah's problems are magnified by the fact that his opponents do not arise from a single political sector like the communists, or a single cultural group like the religious conservatives. The dissent cuts right across class, religious and political divisions. It ranges from Marxist students on the extreme left to Western-educated intellectuals and professionals in the center to religious conformists on the far right. In spite of the diversity of background and motive, the protesters all have a certain amount in common. They share a bitter frustration over the failure of many of the Shah's economic programs, the rising inflation brought on by oil wealth, the denial of civil and political rights, and many years of what they say has been repressive rule. Diplomats and those who have met the Shah in recent weeks say he is a subdued and saddened man. He has seen his dreams for his country's future shattered. He's endured the most extreme personal attacks from his opponents. The imposition of martial law has at best only given him a breathing space. His main hope would be to control the situation until next June, when he has promised general elections. If he were then prepared to accept some kind of constitutional monarchy and bring the opposition into a fully representative government, stability could return to Iran. History, though, is against the Shah. Incredibly, there hasn't been a single peaceful succession of power in Iran since Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC. Today, even the Shah's most loyal supporters are thinking the unthinkable, that he may have to go. This time, though, the threat comes not from a palace revolution, not from the military, and not from a foreign power. It's a complex mixture of economic, social, and religious factors in a country the Shah wanted to push head first into a modern Western-style society. It has proved to be an explosive mixture, and at the center of it all, it's the Shah himself who's now feeling the full blast.